I'm a writer, and I thought I would talk about Formation Lap, which is my Formula One novel. And I figured that the best way to do that would probably be while I was building Formula One Lego. So the Lego set that I'm building is the SF24. It's Lego Technic. And I didn't get all of the footage because some of it was filmed badly because it kept falling, the camera. And then obviously the more Lego that was put together, the less able it was of being on the same screen. So it's a bit annoying, but yeah, I'm gonna just talk about my book. So to begin with, I came up with this idea in like December 2023. I was like, what if I wrote a book about Formula One? And it was literally just because it was the winter break, and I was like, you know what? That would be kind of fun. December ended, January began, and then I think it was about halfway through, I decided, for different reasons, to take a year out from university. And that to me felt like the perfect opportunity to write this book because I'd never written a book before. And I had this idea that I was really like keen on at that moment. So that was what happened. Basically, I started planning for the next few months, creating characters, creating the team names, all that sort of stuff. Finished that year of university, and then it was the 27th of June I began writing. Now, that novel is being queried, so I'm not really touching it. I'm calling it finished, even though I know I'm gonna end up editing it and stuff in the future. But basically, it's about Natasha James. Now, Natasha is this young woman who I don't want to say she's average because obviously she's in Formula One, but she's not like a special person. Like, she isn't immediately going to become the world champion. She isn't, someone who necessarily has everything together. She is a flawed person who happens to be in this very difficult, very demanding career that she's never been in before. And it's all very, very different. She has a lot of people who suddenly know who she is, who didn't know who she was a little bit ago, because I feel like there are a lot of people who don't keep up with Formula 2 and stuff, even if they're fans of Formula 1. So they, it's quite common, I think, that people, they move up and all of a sudden it's like, oh, who's this? So she's kind of experiencing that firsthand, and it's a first-person present tense book, which it wasn't my plan for that to be the case, but it worked really well, I think, for this specific idea, because you get to experience what it's like from her perspective, and it happens in the moment. So like in the races, I describe what's happening, I describe like overtakes, things that maybe go wrong, all that sort of stuff, and you don't watch it with this sense that it's happened already. You watch it as it's unfolding, and I think that the first person sort of present tense really works really well for that. I'm gonna move. Oh, so basically that is the main thing, is that it's about this woman who is in Formula One. It covers 2 years, so it's in 2022 and 2023. I do think it's worth mentioning that 2022 is obviously, if I'm remembering right, it's when the regulations changed. So there was a big shift in the grid in 2022 because some teams did well out of it and some teams didn't. The world that my book is set in is a completely fictionalized version of this world. It is a more lenient version of this world. There is a trans character in this book who I will not be writing about going through any hardships. There is an openly gay driver who is one of the main characters in this book. I'm not going to write about him having hardships. I don't want to write about that. I want it to be mostly a safe space. There are going to be a few things that are obviously not good happen, but you wouldn't have to go into this and like see something that's horrific and might trigger you. And I think that is like a big thing for me, is that this grid, it's completely fictional, so it's not based off of any real life drama that's happened. It's not based off of real teams. It's not based off of real drivers. It's fiction. Natasha is taken seriously as a member of the grid. She is not seen as this like pathetic person because she's a woman. There are people who think that. I'm not going to pretend that this is like a utopia. It just as kind of like a slow progress. Like by the end of this trilogy, it's the first in a trilogy, um, my aim is that it will be more normalized for like women and queer people, for example, to be in the sport. And Natasha isn't, the first, but she is the only woman currently at the time that it begins, and she marks the first time in a while. So it's kind of reminiscent of the real world in that things aren't perfect, but it's slightly better. It's slightly more inclusive, and it gets more and more inclusive, probably faster than it will in real life, which is unfortunate, but we can see how that goes. I do think that the main thing is that she is dealing with the fact that she's in Formula One, she's dealing with how that's a different thing for her to experience. But she's also experiencing a rivalry with this other character. His name's Joel, and they have a history. I'm not going to go too much into that, but they have this history, and it's not very good. And so they are fighting intensely from like the very beginning, and it's not just on track. Okay, they have arguments, they have little tiffs, and they are public, and it's not great. And I think the main thing for me is that this relationship is one that's going to stick throughout the majority of the books, because her relationship with her teammate Matteo, he is this old, wise world champion who he is old, like he's in his late 30s, and I don't want to drag his character out. So he isn't going to be around for a really long time, and I think that his relationship with her is something that was really special. It's something that I'm quite proud of, the way that it's not forced, like they don't suddenly become besties, but they know each other quite well, they trust each other, and I think the main thing is that he watches her grow, and he watches her grow as the successor to this team leader position that he's held at this team for a while. So there's like a nice relationship there between them. She has relationships with some of the other drivers. She doesn't have any like rivalries with anyone else currently in this like book, but there are highs and there are lows, and I think that I've tried to do them in a way that isn't too overdramatic. But also accepts the fact that she's 19 at the beginning, and while she does quickly become 20, she's still young, she's still growing, and this is like all very new. She wants to move away from home, she still lives at home, she's saving money to live in Monaco, which is very expensive, and because she's a rookie, she still doesn't make that much money yet. It is a big deal. It is a very big deal for her to be moving away from home, to be moving away from her friends, to be moving away from the friends that are also moving on with their own lives. Like, it's about growing up as much as it's about Formula One. It's about having relationships with people and learning to let people, be there for you, and also to be there for them, to maybe be a bit less selfish sometimes. There is, it's really hard to kind of summarize this whole plot, because it's basically the main comp title that I use is Carrie Soto's Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid, specifically because it is one of those books where it focuses just as much on the stuff that happens away from the sport that this main character is a part of. And when you're at the race weekends, it is supposed to be very interactive, in the sense that like you could kind of imagine it being a real race weekend. You see the racing, and it's written in a way that it is written by a fan, and you know that it's written by a fan because it's like, there's detail, but it's also accurate. It isn't pretending that they're going to have this x-ray vision that allows them to see 100 feet behind them. Like, you can imagine what's going on, but also you're not giving everything away in the way that you would be as an audience member. So you kind of are in this girl's head as she progresses, and she grows up a lot. She goes through a lot of things that she develops. She develops the understanding that sometimes it's good to put the phone down and walk away. She develops a really good relationship with her team, specifically with her race engineer, who I absolutely love. He's great. And it's just one of those books that I think is supposed to be fun, and sometimes the fun happens to include slightly depressing things that happen to a character. And it's going to get worse on that front. I think that there are more depressing things coming her way than she has dealt with so far. But I believe that that's a huge part of what makes the story entertaining. And I think the biggest praise that I've gotten, and the main thing that I want to share, is the fact that people who are fans of Formula One have read this and said that they enjoyed it and that it was clearly written by someone who knew about the sport and was like knowledgeable. The second thing that I found really reassuring is that there have been people who haven't been fans of Formula One who have read this and have been like, apart from a few things that I maybe had to Google, it was totally able to be followed and I'm enjoying it. Which is like so nice that I found that middle mark, because as well, I have done so much research. I have had to do research into things that you haven't even like got in the book. But in order to understand how to write certain things, I have to understand the history in the real world so that I can make a fake history that fits. I have these multi-generational drivers. I have teams that have, teams that don't exist anymore, teams that have been around since the beginning, teams that have changed their names. Like, I've mentioned all of these little things that are real. I've alluded to real things, little Easter eggs, which you can see. And a lot of the characters' names as well are references to characters in other things that I've loved, because I had to come up with 20 drivers. And apart from Natasha, who she wasn't based on a real person necessarily, but like in terms of the vibe that she gives off, she was based off of a real woman who, I mean, I'm not going to name her because it's not like a super close resemblance, but she was based off of like how sort of effortlessly beautiful and, classically sort of elegant this one specific woman was. Because I think she is one of those people who she's meant to kind of be almost a stereotype. Like, you look at her and you think that she's this classic woman who, she's beautiful, she's really well put together, she dresses really well, she isn't afraid of being emotional. She if she wins a race, she's gonna maybe cry about it because she's happy that she's done well. If she does badly, she isn't afraid of looking depressed on camera, Like, she's not unashamed of showing emotion on camera, because I think that she is quite a shy person, really, and getting used to the cameras is a thing that she kind of has to do. But in terms of the woman figure that has been around in the stereotypical woman, she is meant to be that. She isn't meant to be this special woman who is so different. She is just a woman who happens to also be very good at driving. And sometimes she worries about that, because I think that it's quite natural to have concerns over the fact that your neck is huge and the fact that you have a lot of muscle, when maybe your style is something that is more flattering on people who aren't like that physically. And I think there are, especially coming up, there's been mentions of it in the first book, where she kind of has to overcome that, and she has to figure out that, just because this is her career doesn't mean that she necessarily has to be happy that her body looks that way, that there are certain things that she has to give up for her career, that there are certain levels of balance that she needs. It's very complex, and I think that rather than focus on the fact that she's a woman and that women do get a lot of hate, and that's a big thing. I didn't want it to be overly hateful. I didn't want her to get loads of hate just because she's a woman, which is a very real issue. I have other books that I plan on doing that show those kind of issues more seriously, but because this is supposed to be quite lighthearted and comfort food, basically, I didn't want to focus too much on that. And so I decided to focus more on the struggles of her as a human being in this very high-profile sport that's very intense. Focus on the way that her relationships maybe suffer, focus on the way that her personal life, maybe she has this idea for what it is, and then she has that and it potentially isn't what she expected, because she's romanticized this life that she didn't have, and then all of a sudden she's in it and it's not exactly what she thought. I don't know. I'm yammering on, basically, about nothing. But I think that the main thing with this book, which because I realized that none of this is super informative. So basically, it's first person present tense. It's told from the perspective of a young woman in Formula One. It shows race sequences. The chapters are named after where they take place. So most of the chapters are named after like the country where the races are. Or for example, in like the American ones where there's multiple, it's like the state or the city or whatever. Yeah, it's the city. I'm being stupid. I don't know why I thought it would be the state. But basically that's the layout of it, is the book. It's set into 2 years. You follow this young woman. She has a teammate who she has a good relationship with. I didn't want to go down the sort of tropes of like it being a romance between a driver and a member of the team, or a driver and another driver. I feel like it's, like no shade to people who do that. But I thought that it would be nice to do a book that doesn't talk too much about the real life issues of a Formula One women driver, specifically like women in motorsport, and how they have like a lot of misogyny around their entirety, their lives, their careers, everything is like criticized all the time. Even like when they're just messing around, they get told that they're not good enough. It is horrendous. So I didn't want to focus on that. I wanted to focus on entirely fictional problem, like just this character and her issues, And I think that it feels weird to say that I did it well, myself, but like I think I did it pretty well. I think that I have a good idea of where her story is going to take her. And I think that the main points really are that she is a young woman who is figuring her life out because she is an adult, and she is starting to actually have to be an adult who is independent. She's moving away from home. She's got friends who are living in different places. She is confronting a few things about her life that she hasn't maybe wanted to until now. And that's like the main point of the book. And she does have a romance, but I wouldn't describe the book as a romance because it only comes up in the last like quarter of the book, maybe. And while her romances are going to get a bigger sort of portion in specifically the last book is huge for that. The actual like romance, it's not a romance novel. It's a book about a woman who has a life, and she happens to be a straight woman who has relationships with men, and that means that she dates men, In this specific book, his name is Fred, and he is like, again, he's kind of like the male version of her. Because Natasha, I didn't really talk about this properly, but she is a stereotypical beautiful woman who, rather than me talking about the misogyny that women face in motorsport outright, I kind of turn the idea on its head by having this woman who is known for being all of these typically feminine things, who does this very typically masculine job, right? Like she's doing a stereotypically male job, and she's doing it whilst retaining her femininity. And I think that's how I wanted to do that, was to show that you can be a woman in motorsport, you can be pretty, you can care about your hair and your makeup, and it doesn't make you less of an important driver. And it's not stated outright that that's what it is, but I feel like if girl boss was still a thing that people talked about, it would be the word that Natasha would probably use to describe herself, or that other people would put onto her. And Fred is kind of that, but he's this heartthrob actor from America. He's literally like the typical golden actor guy that, you meet, except he's also got this depth to him, and he's also someone who isn't afraid of being afraid. He isn't afraid to tell people the truth about how he's feeling. He doesn't hide those things from himself. He's not this awful guy. He treats the main character well. He helps her to work through her insecurities by being there for her 100%. And he doesn't not call her out on stuff. I mean, it's not in this first book because they barely know each other, but their relationship is going to be a healthy one. And when it stops potentially being healthy, shall I say, they're not going to sit around and allow that to be just the norm for them. And I think that's the main thing, is that I wanted this book to be About Formula One, written by someone who actually cares and knows about Formula One, and in my opinion, I understand it quite well. So hopefully that comes across. But I also wanted it to be about women and friendships that women have and the way that men can be, very healthy men who don't see women as these lesser creatures. I didn't want to write about that. I wanted to write about the grid welcoming this woman to it. I wanted to write about her friends on the grid and how they are there for her and how when she has good moments, they celebrate with her. I wanted to write about a male love interest who is basically like the dream guy, but he's the dream guy in a way that is realistic, in a way that allows him to also be human. And, they work through their relationship maturely. I wanted this whole book to be about this one woman and her life, and I wanted it to be a happy read with moments that make you think, oh my god, my heart is being torn out. And I have had one reader so far who was like crying a little bit. Not like a lot, but because it isn't a super sad book, yeah, and there are scenes that I've added since, I will admit, that have, I would say, are like the worst parts to read. But to have someone read this book and to feel attachment to these characters and to, care about them, that is huge to me. And I'm hoping that more people, obviously, when this book gets shared to more people, that they'll feel the same way. Because I do believe that that is possible. And I think that I have written characters who are likable. I've written characters who have depth. I've written characters who you can see in bad lights as well as in good ones. And no one is like bad. There's not a villain outright. It's just that there are people who are antagonizing at moments and that are less antagonizing others. And I think that is my big thing with the rivalry with Joel, is there is one specific moment that I love where she is so angry at him. She literally is like ready to go off at him. And then she sees him and she just feels so bad for him and she helps him. Not a lot, but for someone who like has a rivalry with this guy, she is kind to him. And I think that those like moments where you can see that their relationship isn't just this one streak, it has like different tones to it and you can sort of get different stuff out of different situations. I think it's really nice. And I think it's even better because that moment it begins with her being mad at him, not just because of what happens, but also because of what happened before, where she was like being peaceful with him and she was like trying to be the better person. And then he irritates her and he makes her mad. And she's like, well, thanks for doing that. It's like you've just stabbed me in the back after I've been like decent with you. So it's nice, like it's a relationship that is complex and you're not just like, oh, I hate this guy. I had one person who was like, he's my least favorite character, and I had someone else who was like, he was my most favorite. Like he was just my favorite, I loved him. So yeah, I'm aware that probably as a summary hasn't actually said that much. However, I will say now, I think that this book is hard to describe without spoiling too much. But the main thing is that it's about Formula One and it's also about people. And it's not lit fic, it is just contemporary fiction. It's, I would say, something akin to kind of like the stuff that you would read for fun with a group of friends and talk about it. So not necessarily book club, but like kind of book club-y, where you go for a fun time and you maybe get super attached to the characters on the way. I'm not saying that this is the most serious novel ever, but it is something that I'm very proud of. And I'm hopeful that an agent will see that and believe in it as much as I do, because especially with like the film coming out, it feels like there are going to be people who want more fictional Formula One stuff and they want more stuff that they can consume outside of race weekends. And especially if you're not a huge romance fan, I think that there's nothing really for Formula One beyond the romance sphere that I've seen. I will admit it's been a few months since I did my research into that because I've been querying for a few months now. But that is the gap that I'm filling, basically, because as someone who is asexual and aromantic, I am not a huge fan of romance, and it has to be done specifically very well. And to me, the idea of reading a book where the two main characters are in Formula One together and they have a romance, it sounds like a HR nightmare to me. So that's not what I was doing. And again, it's no shade to people who do that, it's just not my thing. So if that's also not your thing, or even if that is your thing, but you're willing to try something a little different, I do believe genuinely that this is perfect for people who like Formula One, and especially if you are someone who wants slightly more representation than the actual grid has. If you want people who aren't portrayed as really awful people that you somehow have to just put up with for like 400 pages, this is that book. Like, there isn't anyone in this book who you should actively dislike. Even if you don't like them, that's fair, but that you don't hate them, hopefully, because that would make book 2 very difficult for me. But yeah, I'm going to end that there before I keep rambling forever about the same stuff, but I'm hoping that shares some stuff about the book that I hadn't said before. It might not have, I honestly don't know. But yeah, I hope that you follow this journey, and bye.